Welcome to the Nordic Venture Show, your speed date with the hottest Nordic innovations and ventures. In this episode, our venture date is with Hycamite, decarbonizing industry with hydrogen and carbon.
Okay, so today we're diving deep into this company, Hycamite.
Okay.
And they're all about decarbonizing industries.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a huge topic these days.
Right.
And we've been going through a bunch of their stuff, mainly their website,
Yeah.
to try and get a sense of like what exactly are they doing, how are they approaching this,
Right.
and what are the problems that they're specifically trying to solve.
Yeah.
And then like why should we even care?
Yeah. Why is this relevant to
Yeah.
anyone listening to this?
Yeah.
So like right off the bat, what really jumps out at me from their website is just how ambitious their goal is.
Yeah.
Like they say right there on the homepage that they're in the business of quote unquote decarbonizing industry.
Right.
And they're doing that by providing low carbon hydrogen and high quality carbon products.
Wow.
So they're not messing around.
So it sounds like they're going like full in on that.
Yeah, they're all in on this. So
Yeah.
I think it's worth really digging into what they're actually doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
So they keep mentioning this methane splitting technology is kind of their core idea. And they say that this is the key to achieving what they call like gradual decarbonization.
Right.
So I guess the question is like, what are the big industries that they're focusing on here?
Yeah, so they're really targeting some of the biggest emitters out there.
Okay.
We're talking about steel chemicals, oil and gas,
Oh, wow.
even cement production.
Okay. So these are like the heavy hitters.
Yeah, these are the industries that are, really tough to decarbonize.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, if they can make any real progress there, it would be a big deal.
It would have a huge ripple effect for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's not just about making the processes cleaner, right?
Mhm.
They're also saying that they can produce things like carbon nanoproducts and graphite
Yeah.
from this methane splitting.
Okay.
And those materials have all kinds of uses in things like, battery production, electronics, anything that needs electrical conductivity.
Exactly.
So it's like a double win in a way.
Yeah, it's not just about reducing emissions, it's about creating valuable products as well,
Yeah,
which could make the whole thing a lot more economically viable.
totally. So that brings up the question of scale, right?
Right.
Like how do they actually take this technology and make a real impact on these massive industries?
Well, that's where their strategy of building these, what they call decarbonization plants, comes in.
Okay.
And the key here is that they're planning to build these plants right next to their clients' industrial sites.
Oh, interesting.
So basically embedding the solution right where it's needed.
So it's like a very localized approach.
Exactly. And to make it all happen quickly and cost effectively, they're relying on what they call modular technology.
Okay, so like modular, like you can kind of just plug and play.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it like building blocks.
Yeah.
You can just add more modules as you need them to scale up the operation
Yeah.
without having to design and build a whole new plant from scratch every time.
Right, that makes a lot of sense.
So it's a pretty smart approach, I think.
Okay, so let's get into some of the numbers here because Heike might make some pretty bold claims
Oh, yeah, they do.
about their technology.
Mhm.
They say that it requires 87% less energy compared to electrolysis
Wow.
for hydrogen production.
That's huge, if true.
Yeah, that's a massive difference.
Yeah,
They also claim a 90% smaller carbon footprint
right.
compared to steam methane reforming.
Which is how most hydrogen is produced today.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is the current kind of standard method.
Yeah, SMR it's called.
Yeah. So those are some pretty big numbers.
They are. And, if they can really achieve those kinds of reductions
Yeah.
at scale,
Yeah.
it would be a game changer for the hydrogen industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
But of course, we have to look at the whole picture.
Of course.
Like, what are their energy sources and what happens to that solid carbon byproduct?
Right, the whole life cycle analysis.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into their proposed solutions then.
Okay.
So they're very clearly positioning hydrogen
Mm-hmm.
made through their method as the most affordable decarbonization option.
Right.
And that affordability aspect seems really crucial.
It is, because at the end of the day, industries are businesses.
Yeah.
And they need to see a clear economic benefit to adopting any new technology, no matter how green it is.
Right. Yeah.
So the fact that Hycamite is leading with affordability suggests that they've really thought about that side of things.
That they're not just focusing on the environmental benefits.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's the whole carbon side of it as well.
Right.
Like they talk about producing these high-quality carbon products for what they call demanding applications. So this isn't just about capturing carbon and storing it somewhere.
No, it's about turning it into something useful.
It's like carbon nanotubes or graphite,
Right.
which can be used in all sorts of high-tech applications.
Yeah, and that could potentially offset some of the costs of
Exactly.
the whole process, right?
It can make the economics even more attractive.
Yeah, totally. They also specifically mention decarbonizing the shipping industry,
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
which is a massive undertaking, right?
It is, because shipping is responsible for a huge chunk of global emissions.
Yeah, like a huge amount.
And it's really hard to decarbonize.
Yeah.
Because those ships are, massive.
Right.
And they run on these dirty bunker fuels.
Yeah, so that shows you the scale of the challenge that Hycamite is taking on.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. Okay, so we've touched on this a bit, but let's try to get a little clearer picture of their core technology. So they describe it as emission-free methane splitting.
Right.
Obviously, their website's not going to give us like a super detailed technical breakdown.
No, of course not.
But what can we sort of glean from that description? Well, the fact that they're talking about splitting methane and producing solid carbon as a byproduct strongly suggests that they're using some form of methane pyrolysis.
Okay, and what exactly is that?
So basically, it's a process where you heat up methane, which is CH4, to a really high temperature, typically without any oxygen present.
Okay.
And that causes the methane molecule to break down into hydrogen gas, which is H2, and solid carbon.
Gotcha.
And the emission-free part probably refers to the fact that the splitting reaction itself doesn't produce any direct greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
But of course, you still need energy to heat up the methane in the first place. So you have to look at the whole life cycle
Of course.
to see how clean it really is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so moving on to their projects section.
Okay.
They really emphasize these scalable and modular plants.
Right.
And this seems to be like a key part of their strategy.
It is. They're basically saying that they can build these plants anywhere. There's a demand for hydrogen.
Right.
And they can scale them up and down as needed by adding or removing modules.
And they're specifically targeting locations near existing natural gas consumers. Right.
Yeah, so like chemical plants or steel mills.
Yeah.
Places that are already using a lot of natural gas.
Yeah.
That way they can tap into the existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
And they don't have to transport the hydrogen very far.
Right. So it's a very efficient approach.
Exactly.
Okay, let's take a look at their news section because they've had a pretty busy year.
Oh, yeah, they have.
So back in March of 2025, they were selected as a strategic project by the European Commission.
Wow. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that's pretty huge, right?
It is, because that kind of recognition from the EU often comes with a lot of benefits.
Like what kind of benefits?
Well, for one thing, it can make it easier to get permits and approvals.
Okay.
It can also open up access to funding. And it just generally gives them a lot more credibility in the industry.
Yeah, it's a stamp of approval.
Exactly.
Okay. Also in March 2025, they highlighted the potential for using their carbon materials to reduce CO2 emissions in tire manufacturing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool application, right?
Yeah, it is, because tires are a major source of emissions.
Right.
And they traditionally use a lot of carbon black, which is made from fossil fuels. So if Hycamite can replace that with their own carbon materials, that would be a big win for the environment.
And it shows how their technology can be applied in all sorts of different industries.
Yeah, it's not just about hydrogen production.
Yeah, for sure.
It's about finding new and sustainable uses for carbon.
Okay. Earlier in March, they also mentioned some updates in the hydrogen industry and regulation.
Right.
So it sounds like they're keeping a close eye on the policy landscape.
Yeah, that's important because the regulatory environment can have a huge impact on the adoption of new technologies.
Lies, yeah.
So they need to be aware of what's happening.
Yeah, and be prepared to adapt.
Exactly.
Okay. In February 2025, they talked about an exponential energy opportunity in the U.S. market.
Okay.
So it sounds like they're setting their sights on expanding beyond Europe.
Yeah, the U.S. is a huge potential market for them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest in hydrogen there.
Especially with the recent push for clean energy.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it makes sense that they would want to be a part of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then back in January 2025,
Okay.
they announced a successful investment round.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's always a good sign.
It is, because it shows that investors believe in their technology and their business model,
Right.
and it gives them the resources to scale up their operation.
Yeah, to really grow the company.
Exactly.
Also in January, they announced that they had received ISO certifications.
Okay.
Can you explain to our listeners what that means?
Sure. So ISO certifications basically mean that a company has met certain international standards for things like quality management, environmental management, and occupational health and safety.
So it's like a seal of approval.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Yeah, okay.
It shows that they're operating in a responsible and ethical way,
Gotcha.
which is important for building trust with customers and partners.
Yeah, especially in an industry like this.
Exactly.
Okay. And finally, in December 2024,
Okay.
they signed a memorandum of understanding with MOA and MOL Plus
Interesting.
to collaborate on promoting their technologies.
Right.
So it seems like they're really keen on partnerships.
They are, because partnerships are a great way to expand your reach
Yeah.
and get your technology into more markets.
For sure.
So it's a smart move on their part.
Okay. And one last thing I noticed on their website is that they have a whole careers section
Oh, yeah.
where they're actively recruiting people,
Uh-huh.
and they're specifically inviting people to join them in
Yeah.
decarbonizing industry and producing critical raw materials sustainably.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, it suggests that they're growing
Yeah.
and that they're really passionate about their mission.
Absolutely.
Okay, lastly, they provide really clear contact information on their website,
Right. Yeah.
including, their address in Finland, their business ID,
Uh-huh.
phone number, email address.
That's always a good sign.
Yeah, it gives you a sense that they're a legitimate company.
Yeah, it shows that they're open and transparent.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the main thing is that Hycamite is a company to watch.
Okay.
They're developing a really interesting technology
Huh.
that has the potential to significantly reduce emissions from some of the most polluting industries.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in a way that's both environmentally and economically sustainable.
Right. By producing valuable carbon products as well.
Exactly. So they're not just reducing emissions, they're also creating new economic opportunities.
Yeah. And their focus on modular and scalable plants
Right.
could really accelerate the adoption of their technology.
Yeah, it makes it much easier to deploy their solutions.
Yeah. And the recent news about their EU recognition and their potential application in tire manufacturing suggests that they're gaining some real traction.
Yeah, they're definitely a company on the rise.
Okay, so this deep dive has definitely left us with some lingering questions, though, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
For example, we'd love to get a more detailed understanding of how their methane-splitting technology actually works at a chemical level.
Yeah, the website doesn't go into too much detail.
No, it doesn't.
So it would be great to learn more about the specific catalysts they use.
Right, and the reaction conditions.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we're also curious about the exact properties of their high-quality carbon products.
Yeah, like what makes them so suitable for use in batteries and electronics?
Right, exactly.
And how do they compare to existing materials?
Yeah, and perhaps most importantly, how do those claimed reductions in energy consumption and emissions actually translate into real-world cost savings
Right.
and environmental benefits for industries?
Those are all great questions.
Yeah.
And I think they highlight the need for more research and analysis
Yeah, for sure.
to really assess the full impact of Hycamite's technology.
Okay, so here's a thought-provoking question for our listeners to ponder.
Okay.
Could the future of industrial decarbonization lie in these kinds of distributed modular solutions
Interesting.
that not only reduce emissions, but also create valuable products from what was previously considered waste?
Yeah, that's a really compelling idea.
Yeah, it's like turning pollution into a resource.
Exactly. And it could be a key part of building a more sustainable industrial future.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Hycamite.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to the Nordic Venture Show. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories of innovation from the Nordics.